Hi, everybody, and welcome to Who Am I podcast. This is William from Who Am I podcast, together with Stephen, discussing today our motivations for putting together this podcast, for discussing questions around personal identity, and why we chose this medium, and what is important to us about having this creative output for you. So enjoy our discussion.
Why we think that having a chat together is worth doing,
Sharing.
and actually recording and sharing.
Yeah.
And that's again because we both like to broaden our perspectives on different subjects,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a good platform for doing that.
Yeah. I've noticed that, well, when I had the idea for the podcast, I thought, who could I do this with? And you're the first and only name that came to my mind. I have had good chats with other people, obviously, but not as consistently. And since we've made an effort to keep in touch since we left Scotland 4 or 5 years ago, yeah,
2014.
One of those. We have managed to keep in touch every few months at least.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty impressive actually when you think about it. Actually,
yeah,
that's been well done us. That's good.
And the meat of our chats has not become less. It's
no, it hasn't.
Yeah, because I feel pretty well understood when I share my thoughts with you.
Likewise.
So that's valuable. I don't want to lose
that. There's no pressure, no criticism, no judgment when we just chat. Because often when people have discussions, it suddenly becomes a right and wrong or my view's more important type discussion.
Yeah. I especially don't like the phrase "I disagree" because that immediately separates us. And when I say that, oh, I don't agree, it's like your opinion doesn't matter.
And that is spot on. Actually, that was what was going through my mind over the last few days about what I want to talk about. Was that in the fact that people seem to think they can't absorb someone's opinion on something. They feel very strongly that they have to reject it because it conflicts with their own. And that's not how things, in my opinion, how things work. Because if the more opinions you absorb, again, the more you're able to understand others. You don't have to believe them. You don't have to agree with them, but you can absorb them and adopt them into your own psyche or soul or whatever you want to call it, so that you understand it, their point of view, in a way that is, again, loving and not just dismissal.
Yeah, I think most people are capable of that. I mean,
definitely.
I'm sometimes offended when I hear other people's opinions and I might need to retreat. But when I feel I'm in a safe place where I can no longer be, let's say, attacked or, put in an uncomfortable conflict situation, then I can process it and not feel threatened that moment. And then I can be more rational about it, which is not always possible in the moment that I'm confronted with something, especially when it's a heated discussion, which I don't like in general.
Yeah. Again, there's no need for a heated discussion.
Yeah.
It just seems to be something that happens that suddenly someone gets defensive about a topic, and we forget that you can just pause and go, okay, let's stop. It's becoming heated. Let's come back to this. We don't want it to be heated. It's just maybe it's our natural defense mechanism kicking in. But people don't necessarily have that wall in their brains, or haven't learned to. Okay, it's like practice. I've often got into many a heated discussion in the past because life is an ongoing process, and not been able to go, hang on a minute, take a step back. Because I think that's very important in discussions. Just pause, okay.
Yeah, that's what real discussions should be like. It's sad to see in the media, say with political discussions, the channels, the platforms just love controversy and fighting. and
it's also
conflict.
quick. It's also
Yeah.
fast, and you've got to answer things in 2 seconds. And I was watching the Joe Rogan show
Hmm.
podcast,
Yeah.
and they had Bernie Sanders on,
I saw
and
that.
it was you saw that as well. It was an amazing discussion.
Yeah.
And he was discussing how he was talking about how you have these like debates that are just literally there for it's just a farce.
Yeah. They call it a sound bite.
Yeah, you don't get time to actually discuss in a nice way your policies.
Yeah. The nuances. There's no room for nuances. And Bernie only had 1 hour time for Joe Rogan. Only.
Yeah.
Joe can talk to people for 3 hours, like Jordan Peterson. He
Yeah.
loves talking to him. I think he's had him on twice. So yeah, that's the #1 podcast I heard.
Is it? Well, good. That's
It's
good.
really
He's very,
reaches a lot of people.
yeah, he's really good. Again, he brings in lots of different perspectives.
Yeah,
He doesn't judge. He doesn't condone in that sense. He
yeah.
just
He
hangs out
has,
with some people.
he has an opinion on things, like
Oh
especially
yeah,
the things he's passionate about. But he can just be diplomatic and really interested in a loving way, like you said. He's respectful. He gets on people
and
from all
listen.
kinds of parts of the spectrum. And what were you going to say?
Yeah, it's cutting out a little bit. I'm
Oh,
not sure why, but yeah, he can listen.
right.
He just sits there, and every so often he just throws in his little 2 cents worth. But
Yeah.
his guests, he's there to hear what his guests have to say.
Yeah.
And the listeners, he knows the listeners are there for that as well.
People are not interested in your opinion until they feel like you're interested in theirs and they feel understood and listened to.
Yeah.
That's something I read. I can't really say that from experience a lot. I just try. I try to be aware of other people's opinions and just, yeah, it's not easy to give them your attention and understanding, but it certainly makes for better relationships.
Yes. Listening is a difficult skill. Like I am rubbish at it. I am really bad. Like I waffle. I am quite happy to again discuss a topic, a situation, and then I'll ask a question or something, and that person will have like 30 seconds, and then I'll be like, oh, they said something really interesting, and I'll start going off on one again, and I'm just like need to learn just to be quiet.
Is it an attention thing, or do you just love the sound of your own voice?
Probably. I'm just excited to just share what's going on. Like somebody else will say something, and I'll just be like, oh, something will trigger in my brain that I think is interesting, and therefore want to share. Because I'm worried if I don't say it now, it'll be gone, and then I won't remember it or something like that. That's probably what's going on. Again, it's subconscious in a way.
Yeah. And there are signals, like when you take a breath because you want to say something, they will see that. At least most people will be aware of that. But if they still talk, then I guess they believe what they have to say is more important. and yeah, I think the best conversations are when you're willing to sacrifice what you want to say, and then just adapt to what the other person says. And yeah, it's not always easy.
It's not. Again, it's asking questions as well, isn't it? It's being able to know what questions to ask people when just having discussions, like things like, what's your opinion? How do you feel about this? Those kind of things. But I also think a lot of my waffleness, if that's even a word, comes from I spend a lot of time with quiet people.
You're a waffle maker.
Yeah, I'm a waffle maker. It's true. I like it. My brain is a waffle maker.
So you spend time with who?
Lots of quiet people.
Okay.
So people that tend to be not as like outgoing as maybe the popular group of people, like the masses, and therefore sometimes in the past I felt the need to be the one who chats, even though I'm quite happy to sit back and not. in a social environment, if everyone's just not talking and no one's saying anything, that feels very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like something's wrong, something's not right. Or actually, it's just enjoying each other's presence.
Yeah.
But there usually has to be something to be, you're doing something. Like if you're all together, you know, you're watching a film or you're on the computer or you're playing board games, you know, you don't have to necessarily talk to each other during that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just sitting there, I don't know, having drinks or whatever, then it can be quite difficult to know what to say and how to maintain conversation.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just a mental pause, just reflecting on what was said.
So I always love when someone comes in and is like, they're the person that can sort of like navigate the conversation and the dynamic in the group.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I can just sit back and I don't have to, but can sort of just bounce off that person.
Yeah. It can be nice. It can also be that they take over too much control and then the whole dynamic gets ruined where everyone had a good share in the conversation.
Yeah.
When someone has a personality that's too big for the rest of the
Great example of that,
circle.
actually.
Hmm?
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted. Carry on. Sorry. Wow. See, exactly. I'm doing exactly what I'm talking about.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to another topic?
Well, I was the link in my brain was talking an example of that dominating conversation in a group setting is Dungeons and Dragons of all
Mm-hmm.
things. So that's really popular at the moment. Like it's made an absolute comeback in the last 4 or 5 years. Where
Pen and paper
everyone,
version in person?
in person, online, again broadcasting it, like Twitch streaming it, YouTube streaming it. If you go onto YouTube and type in D&D, there are hundreds of shows because it's very entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
The social dynamic of that is that you have one person guiding the story scenario, then you have 4 people plus, or maybe 3, depending on the dynamic. And in that social situation, if there's one person that dominates the whole thing, it can be a completely different game to if it's a even spread. You have the other dynamic of the dungeon master or games master. It's their job to actually negotiate that to make sure that one person isn't dominating things. So it throws in a whole new social structure. And I know people have fallen out in Dungeons and Dragons and got upset because one person is trying to control the situation to make sure everyone, like DM, is trying to make sure everyone's having the same amount of fun. But the big personality, and they're enjoying it, you know, they're allowed to enjoy it, they're allowed to have fun, be happy, and whatever else. But it's those social clues of being aware that other people can get involved.
How often do you play it? Do you meet once a week with your friends?
I play a little bit at the moment with my brother Ben, but I've just finished up a 2-year campaign. So did you get that as well? Did you come up on your screen? Yeah. But yeah, I just finished a 2-year campaign. Weirdly, with somewhere up between 15 and 20 people.
What? Online?
Yeah. Well, so originally there's about 13 of us in our games group who wanted to play Dungeons & Dragons, and I was like, let's see what happens. I hadn't DM'd before, I hadn't done it, but I thought, you know what, I always go for the extremes, so I'll try it. And it worked reasonably well, but it was a difficult dynamic because, again, people weren't getting enough time. I was constantly having to jump to different people a lot. And then I split it off into, more people jumped in, more people came along, and I split it off into 3 groups of 5 or 6. And then a group of 1, because the story had one sort of inverted commas bad person, which was my brother as his character. And then the other groups were on the quest to try and stop him, all in the same sort of timeline, but different countries.
Wow.
So that was a social dynamic nightmare, but lots of fun. In hindsight, I'll never do it again.
And it took 2 years to go through the whole story, the whole adventure?
Yeah, I mean, some adventures never stop. So D&D is this weird one where you can have, the campaign can last a year, it can last 10 years, depending on the group of people, depending on the story. Most pre-made things from Wizards of the Coast who make D&D I think a year maybe. If you do it every week or two,
Wow.
it might last. Like I know Curse of Strahd. That's quite a long one, I think. So
Now,
maybe like
does that mean the dungeon master has to keep building the world?
so yes, if it's their own world, yes. If it's the pre-made one, they have a general sense of how the world is,
Okay.
and they kind of just use the resources that you've been given for that. But yeah, going back to the point, the social dynamic of that is fascinating. Trying to listen to people, let them have their time.
Nice.
So,
I've been studying a bit about gamification and
okay.
how central games are to learning, and how hopefully the education system, schools for children will adapt and
Oh,
recognize
yeah.
that being told to shut up, sit down, and listen is not productive,
No.
and that there's nothing wrong with you if you can't sit still and listen for hours to something that is not exciting for you, and how you can actually use games, simple games, complex games, board games, video games, to convey all the things you need in traditional schooling. So I'm excited about becoming aware of that. And I wonder what things you learn, because games aren't interesting unless you learn. So I think you were saying that the social dynamics are interesting. But what else have you learned just from games like D&D?
There's a lot of studies going on. I'm assuming studies and discussion going on about how this helps, especially in D&D and role-playing games, because it gives you a way to, again, learn social situations that are technically fictional, and there's no consequence really to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can help develop your social skills in that manner. A lot of teenagers right now are really getting onto it, especially in America. D&D clubs, groups, like Stranger Things has really blown that up as well,
Mm-hmm.
because the TV show Stranger Things is basically based on D&D stuff.
Hmm.
And has really blown up that ability to learn through a story. We've had story through acting a story, not just reading a story. People love to see it at theatre or read it or see it on TV or the cinema. This gives you a very immersive experience where you can learn anything. Like you can learn the social skill, you can learn how you feel about good and evil, or how you would feel in a bar brawl, or like it can get really emotional because you get attached to your character. So you're playing your character, and if your character gets injured or your party members get injured, you go through emotional learning through those experiences, and it is just brilliant.
But it's like a flight simulator, right?
Yeah,
There's no risk of, say, physical harm,
yeah,
but you get the real experience.
yeah. And again, if the DM's doing it right and you're doing it right as a group, there's no like risk for social or like psychological or emotional damage, because you're with friends, you're in a comfortable situation, and there should be no judgment and just having fun. You can be as silly as you want. Like you can just let loose. You don't have to hide. You can explore aspects of your own personality through another character if you want to, without realizing a lot of people do, because they're not out and about and going to feel judged. They'll just say, it's the character, but actually they might be actually just exploring part of themselves. And then D&D also has the element where it's just fun and you can just kill everything, and that tends to be what happens to start off with, where you get a party come in and you put a scenario in front of them, and instead of like negotiating or being diplomatic, it's just because it's a fictional world, they're like, we draw our bows and our swords and we go and kill. You have that fun element
In
to it.
D&D, you say a lot what you do, right? I mean, unless
Yes.
it's a video game, maybe. But when you're with a group of friends in person, or
Yes.
I guess you say, I do this, which is not normal speech.
No.
That's interesting.
You have the third person as well. You can say the person's name, like your character's name. So
Okay.
say like Sam does that. Sam is upset. Sam cries. Sam whatever. If that's the character's name.
You could turn that into a book if you record what everyone says, especially
Yeah.
when it's in the third person.
Yeah. Again, the podcasts, like
Oh,
there's
there's a podcast where you just follow someone's game.
yeah, like that's what there is on YouTube. If you type into YouTube, if you type
Okay.
it into Twitch, I got into the audio stuff about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a bit more. And there's so many just fun games, and you're just listening to them play. They just listen to them play. Like
Cool.
the main one that I listen to is Acquisitions Incorporated. They're the Wizards of the Coast, the guys that make it, their own official D&D team, I guess. They have other ones as well, but this one started off as just a little podcast. Two of the players I don't think even had played D&D before. It's been going for about 10 years.
Wow.
And then they got to the point after a few years where they did it at conventions on stage in front of people.
In costume?
And yeah, sometimes in costume. And Will Wheaton was involved in a few of them. And yeah, it's so much fun and entertaining. And again, you learn like you do for any fictional medium, really. The whole catharsis thing.
I don't like it when people say, well, what does that have to do with the real world? That doesn't prepare you for anything really important. But I mean, reality is what you make of it, first of all.
Yeah.
And a game, or a movie for that matter, no matter how fictional it is, it's only interesting as long as it has some relation with the real world. If it were totally disconnected from it, totally abstract, it would not be interesting. You wouldn't know what's going on and how is this a story. So there's always some parallel, and some stories are more distant from the world we know than others, but that's just how stories work.
Yeah, which is a perfect segue that will probably be part of every podcast. The fact that I'll mention Dune at least once in
Sure.
everything,
Okay.
which is the segue is that that's why a lot of people struggle with Dune, because it's so different and so outside of what we understand or think we understand in its environment and its universe. But once you start scratching the surface, you start to see the commonalities of the human experience. But it's why a lot of people like read the first few chapters and just put it down, because it's like, what the hell? There's just so many different words used and actions.
It's not just names, it's actually vocabulary.
The political structure, the vocabulary, and and again, that loops back into the fact that most stories, they do have the good ones, the great ones, have the common human experiences within them.
Yeah, even when people have special abilities, it's not too foreign, because, well, we would all like to have some special abilities, but you can still use some of your imagination to see what it's like to read people's thoughts or fly or whatever.
Again, it's the emotional experience, isn't it? It's the
you call it catharsis, right?
Yeah.
I read once in some, maybe on your homepage, where you say that catharsis is one of the reasons you like fantasy media in general. Yeah. And that's similar to the gaming.
Sorry, go on.
And that's similar to the gaming experience we were just talking about. It's virtual, but it's also real.
Yeah. No, it loops back to what we said at the start to do with oh man, it just went. My memory just lost it. We're talking about human experience. That's really annoying. I had a really good
okay,
loop
well,
back.
I have another question. Maybe you'll get back to it.
Yeah.
As an author of fantasy, do you have a certain goal for your readers? Is there something rewarding for you if they manage to do something interesting by reading your books?
I never really. Maybe I should start. I never really have the readers in mind. It sounds very selfish, but it's my experience. Like, writing the story is, for me, has always just been, what would I like to read? Like, if like the ideas come into my brain, and I just write them in a way that if someone else had written the story, I would pick it up and just be absorbed into it. And I just hope that other people enjoy them too, kind of thing. That's always kind of been my, like, I just weirdly haven't, in the past, I've been a very overthinking human being, and I still am in many ways, But when it comes to stuff like that, I just do it. I just write it out and take the concepts and roll with them. Like, it sounds really pretentious as like and annoying, but the story tends to kind of just write itself. And
Nice.
like, I've been very fortunate with that, where they just flow.
Stream of
Um,
consciousness.
yeah, there's a lot of editing involved. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
corrections that need to be made afterwards. There's a lot of that. But the initial outline, I don't necessarily think about who's going to read this or how they're going to respond. And again, maybe I should be more conscious of that. There's been stuff that's happened with certain stories
I mean,
where people
don't let it ruin your recipe.
know.
If something's working for you.
Yeah, it feels like it is. It's a slow industry, so currently in the process of just waiting for a revamp of all my work, pretty much. So until that happens, I'm pretty much just working on projects and not really doing anything in terms of promoting and marketing. But the reader experience and the catharsis, it tends to. I think I try to write them. Well, when I write, I think I write in a way that people can interpret it however they want. So it's ambiguous and open enough that a lot of what goes on, you can pick and choose how you respond to it for your own perspective. Because often a story can be like, okay, this is how it is, this is what's going to happen, this is what's good, this is what's bad, blah blah blah. But I think a lot of what I write, I think will polarize people. People will read it and be like, okay, that's cool, blah blah, because they've seen it as that way. Or other people be really offended or be like, oh, this is rubbish, because that's what they've projected onto it, that they've chosen to see that side of the story, rather than the whole.
You write offensive things?
Not offensive in that, the interpretation, we talked about the Frankenstein story earlier. In the Diary of V. Frankenstein, I deal with equality and gender roles and those kind of topics. And again, I won't get into it now because it's not time for that discussion. Maybe do it in the future. But it caused a bit of difficulty between the editors and myself and the publisher to try and get it to where it needed to be.
Did you have to push for it to happen the way you wanted?
Yeah, and I also had to be humble enough to accept that I was wrong at various points, and make sure that I was keeping my mind open, again, to how readers will respond to things. Just because I think that the interpretation should be one way, or I see an interpretation that I hope other people will see, is probably a good way of putting it. It isn't going to necessarily mean that they do see it. So I have to actually learn to be a bit more specific in the plot and think about who's this actually being written for, and who's going to read this, and actually think about that more, because in the past, as I say, I haven't. So actually consciously thinking about it will make sure there are no obvious contradictions, because you can contradict if you're trying to do a theme and then you end up without realizing it contradicting it through characters or through the experiences, then it can look very bad as a writer. You can look like an idiot.
And people love to point that out.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Maybe you could do something on social media to get more feedback on what your readers think about your stories. I mean, if you want to go that way. Again, don't do anything to kill the thing that works.
Yeah. Well, as I say, this is part of a discussion, another sort of half an hour worth of waffling on my part, just to I guess discuss that story and what happened in that story, and how, in terms of how it led to me having these discussions with the editors about the content, and if you're trying to cover a certain theme. So I think that for another time, definitely. How about you? What are your mediums for social, I guess creative output? I guess you do coding and stuff. And
Well, I haven't been creative in a while, but when I do have some leftover energy, yeah, I like some programming. I let's see, about a year ago, I was trying to um, gather all the exercises I did as a student of computer science, and it was difficult to find all the code left over in Dropbox folders, emails, and some of the software had moved on so that it was no longer compatible. But then I thought, no, it's fine for that to be in the past. I recovered some of it, and it was interesting, made me a bit nostalgic for the days of studying. I wish I could be a student my whole life.
Yeah.
So no, up till now I haven't felt the need to produce much, but now I'm starting a new phase.
Yeah.
This is a big step for me to do a podcast. So far, I've just been soaking up everything.
Yeah.
Some people like to call me a sponge because I just love to learn all kinds of things. And so that's been reading and also the last few years, YouTube, since I realized, wow, there's a lot more information out there than what television offers you. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
more diverse and more tailored towards what I think personally is valuable. So 3 years ago, I developed an interest in politics, and that was never there before. So now, I guess you could say my output is, or I have a need now to talk to people about politics. And there's not a lot of opportunity for that. I mean, with people who are open, even though they have a different perspective than I do. But whenever I can, I mention it and see what happens, what response I get. For example, on Friday, I asked my colleagues, did any of you do anything or think about anything because it was September 11th, 2 days ago? And they said, not really.
Yeah.
Just that it was on the news a bit. And I said, yeah, well, on the alternative news channels that I watch, there was quite a lot about it, but not in the sense of let's have a moment of silence, but let's go through all the evidence again that shows that the attacks in Manhattan were not just a few people from a cave in the Middle East, but a
Yeah.
huge.
There is a lot of discussion around that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it should never stop because it's still buried and suppressed, and not enough people know the truth about what actually happened, and just how many institutions and governments were involved in it. Anyway.
Well, a good idea would be to next discussion, politics, and then a bit of my book stuff in terms of themes and how they relate to, I guess, how as a creator you create things for yourself and for your audience.
Mm-hmm.
So you can discuss some politics stuff together. We can discuss. You can, if you want to. Again, just an idea.
Sure. Yeah. The topic, like I described the main topic of the whole podcast on the homepage as we're discussing questions around personal identity, because I thought that's what the question "Who am I?" is about. Not like who the heck am I, but rather like of all the things that people tell themselves about their identity, like what applies to me? How do I feel about what I am, who I am, in relation to the world, other people, the environment? So
like
the
Greeks, the Greeks had it good with obviously all their philosophy, and it was above the temple at Delphi in I don't know 600 BC or whatever. Whereas where the phrase "know thyself" comes from. So this constant desire to know thyself, to know who we are, who am I. The other phrase was, I think it's like everything in moderation, something along those lines.
Also by the Greeks, you mean?
Yeah. So it was the Temple of Delphi.
Okay.
And it was written above it, those two phrases, know thyself. And I think the translation, I think, is something along the lines of like everything in moderation or nothing in excess, that sort of phrase. So yeah, the know thyself is one of my favorite things ever, because it's all we do as humans. We just constantly try to understand who we are.
That's right. In many different ways. Like you're the artist. You I guess you express, right? Would
Try
you
to.
say you
Yeah.
express along your quest for knowledge about yourself? I like that your goal is not to entertain people or to make money or to tell people what they should be.
Yeah.
It's just a thing you do for you.
Yeah.
And if it can help you support yourself financially, then that's great.
That's it. Yeah, that'd be nice. But again, it's exploring all these like the podcast. The plan of the podcast is to explore just many different topics. That's what I do with my writing.
Yeah.
Like one set of books is more philosophical and draws on religion in a sort of fantasy setting, and then one set is like steampunk mixed with again the who am I and the equality concept and the different perspectives around equality. And then I've got another one that's just like solely, I think, just going to end up being all fantasy and not actually thinking too much about concepts and just literally just be a crazy adventure story. So again, it's many different ways of like a podcast or like story. All art is the same, really.
Yeah.
I guess true art, but that's a discussion for another time.
And I'm not so much the artist, but pieces of media that have influenced me a lot and not made me what I am, but have resonated with me, have also had to do with the question, who am I? And that's the Matrix movies.
Yes.
Especially the first one.
Yeah.
I remember how that really got to me. And science fiction in general, that's my favorite genre because it shows that there is value in thinking about questions that we don't ask ourselves every day when we go shopping or working. We just live, we just survive. But I think for life to be more valuable, you should explore more, deeper. And that's not always easy when there's no time or energy left for it. But in movies, since they're entertaining and a good source of education as well,
but it has to be fun. Like you talked about earlier, where it's the play thing and the we learn through playing games and stuff. It has to, people, switch off or get bored if it's too like if a discussion is too in depth or too detailed. But if you can weave that into fun things for them, again, everyone has their own kind of fun, because like my fun sometimes is having the massive theological discussion the last hours, and then other times I just want to play a board game or D&D, which can explore something else or whatever. I don't know what's going to be explored. It is always trying to be conscious of everyone else's different fun, I guess, and like meaning of life, like that kind of concept. Because some people do just want to drift through life; they don't actually want to explore other things. And who are we to tell them they have to? But I think there are a lot of people out there who want to. I think that's a key thing as well, is that they want to discuss these things, but again, it's not always, they can't find the right people to discuss them with.
Right. Yeah, we're very isolated, and we don't realize how much we have in common, and how we're not alone at all. But it takes some risk to face someone and just open up about things that can be very private, can be hurtful to share. But it can be very rewarding if it works out. So yeah.
That's the honesty behind it. It's hard. The trust and honesty. But I think that's what we have. I think that's pretty much what we have. We have a trust and an honesty where we can just discuss things, life, and fun things, and things that we enjoy.
Thank you for listening to that discussion between me, William, and Stephen. And come back in about 1 or 2 weeks for our next episode, when we talk about further questions around personal identity. Our homepage is whoamipodcast.com. See ya!